Come today to God's Word, I'd like you to join me in praying before we take a look at what the Bible has to say in Genesis 34. So let's bow our heads and pray together. Lord, thank you that you are a faithful God through all the ages. Thank you that you preserved even this difficult, hard to read passage in your Word. You preserved it for our faith. God, I pray that you teach us that your mercies are new every morning, and that you would make us the kind of people, as we follow Jesus, who would stop and not be distracted and listen to what you're saying, that we would bring our hearts before you as the psalmist did and say, "Search us, O God, and know our heart. Examine us." Jesus, we need examining. We don't want to live an unexamined life. So we ask, God, that you would take your word in all of its truth and inerrancy, and you would shine it on our hearts so that we'd be more like Jesus. We pray this in his name. Amen. Well, if you would take your Bibles and turn to Genesis 34, and as you're turning there, I just want to say it very clearly that this is a painful and evil chapter. There's a lot of bad stuff that we're about to read here. It's one of those times when you're reading the Bible, you go, I wonder why this is in here. What's the purpose of reading this passage? There's words in here that I don't want to even say out loud, but they're here. You know, what's really puzzling about this too is as you're following the story of Jacob in Genesis, we have seen that he just has come out of some great experiences. He got really close to God before he met his brother Esau. He saw God face to face. He wrestled with the Lord. He got a new identity. His name was changed to indicate the future that he's going to have and God's blessing on his life. Things are going so well. And then he meets his brother. We saw that last week. He met his brother, and they had reconciliation face to face. It's going so good. And then chapter 34 comes. How can things go from being so good to so bad so quickly? Why is this here? Well, in studying the Bible and the training I've had, and you've heard other pastors and Bible teachers tell you that it's really important when you're reading the Bible to understand the context. The context. Context is king when it comes to interpreting the Bible. The context is the king. And so there's a couple things I'd like you to write down that kind of frame what Genesis 34 is about and why it's here. So there's a couple of statements I'd like you to write down. Would you write this statement down just to help us understand why it's here? It's on the screen. Genesis 34 was written to the children of Israel, explaining why two of the descendants' sons were cut out of the land inheritance. So let's remember, Genesis was written by Moses. Under the direction of the Lord, the Holy Spirit was guiding Moses in recording what needed to be spoken and written to recently released, freed Hebrew slaves who had been enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years. Now, that was a large group of people Moses was leading out. Now, you need to know something about those people. They're called the 12 tribes of Israel. In other words, the 12 sons of Jacob. So the 12 sons of Jacob have grown over 400 some years, and they have entire tribes named after one of the sons of Jacob. And Moses is leading them out of Egypt into the promised land, when they get to the promised land, every son, or I should say every descendant of one of the sons of Jacob gets a piece of land to settle in the promised land. Well, Moses knows there's two descendants from two of the sons that are going to get zero land. And this is why This is one of the reasons why this is recorded, because Moses wants them to know some of you aren't going to get any land when we get there. And Genesis 34 is why Levi, one son, and Simeon, another son, get no land. So that's who it's written to. Now, it's important for us to understand as we read God's word that it's not written to us, but it is written for us. It's for our faith in the Lord. As we follow Jesus, this is God's holy, inerrant, authoritative word. And when we read it, we need to understand the context of who it was written to, the 12 tribes of Jacob. But it's written for us. In fact, when you look at Genesis chapter 34, it's preceded by chapter 33. And chapter 33 is a great chapter of reconciliation. And if you actually just skip over to chapter 35, it's almost seamless. If you don't even have 34 in there, but the Lord wanted 34 in there. There's a reason God wanted 34 in there, because real life doesn't just go seamlessly, does it? Real life has interruptions. Unwanted interruptions. In fact, I would even say evil, painful interruptions. Genesis 34 is a painful, evil interruption. And there's much to be learned from it. You see, the Apostle Paul, when he was writing to the Corinthians in the New Testament, I want you to see what he wrote. It's on the screen. He wrote this. He said, "These things happened to them as examples, and were written down as warnings," notice this, "for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will provide a way out so that you can endure it." So Genesis 34 is written to the descendants of the sons of Jacob, but it's written for us as a warning. There's something God wants us to stop and reflect on and think over and meditate on with your Bible open. And let God's word have its work in your heart and mind. You see the words warning on the screen. You see the words be careful. You see the word temptation or temptations. You see that it's common to human nature. Common. So would you write this down? Genesis 34. This is the next thing to frame this chapter with before we get into the text. Would you write this statement down? It's another long statement, but one worth writing down. Genesis 34 was preserved for our faith to endure temptations common to human nature as we follow Jesus. So, as difficult as Genesis 34 will be to read, parts of it are very unpleasant. It's going to seem like suddenly this comes out of nowhere, something awful comes out of nowhere. But what I want you to see, it seems sudden, but really it's very subtle. It's something's been growing in Jacob's heart. And that's what life's like. Things start subtly growing in our hearts and minds. I'd like you to take a look at chapter 33, which we looked at last week. Chapter 33, verse 18. It says, "After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem." That city is going to come up a lot. So let's just note the word Shechem, the name Shechem. It's a city in Canaan. And he camped, notice this in verse 18 of chapter 33, he camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. A couple of things we should note about Shechem very quickly. First of all, Shechem is located within the promised land. So he didn't follow his brother Esau outside the promised land. He's in Shechem, which is within the borders of the Promised Land, and Shechem is a major international trade route. So major roads go through there. Shechem is a great place to put down roots and make money. You're going to see this come up. It's about the money. Isn't that so true of life? Follow the money. Jacob followed the money. He settled in Shechem. Which is interesting because in chapter 28, Moses drops a hint in chapter 28, and that's back a few chapters, when Jacob had his experience of, remember this, he ran away from home. This is 20 years earlier. He ran away from home because he's afraid for his life. He's out alone by himself, and he sees Jacob's ladder, you know, the ramp from heaven, and the angels of God are ascending and descending on this ramp, and he says, and he calls that place Bethel, Bethel. And Jacob says in chapter 28, Lord, if you bring me back to the Promised Land, I'm going to settle right here in Bethel. And guess what Jacob doesn't do? He follows the money, and he forgets his promise in chapter 28. A promise he made to God 20 years earlier. Maybe Jacob's thinking, well, you know, Shechem's, it's only 20 miles away from Bethel, the place he said he was going to go. So maybe he thinks, well, that's close enough, right, God? I mean, I won't go live in Shechem. I'll just be outside the city. I'll kind of flirt with temptation on the edges. I won't really get involved, and I'll just kind of stay. So here's the thing we can take away from that is half obedience is disobedience. There's no such thing as half obedience. And Jacob knows this. Something's been growing in Jacob's heart. And if Jacob would have just taken time to examine what was going on in his heart. You see, Shechem isn't the problem. It's when Shechem settles in your heart. That's the problem. So let me ask us this question. What is settling in your heart this week? What have you stopped and said, God, I want you to take a look at what's going on in my mind. I want to just stop the distractions. I think, here's my suspicion, is chapter 34 wouldn't be here at all if Jacob had been checking his heart and examining it. When things start turning around, it's human nature. Things start going really well. What do? Well, this is great. I mean, I feel really free. I think I'll go over here. I can do really well and take care of myself. And I'm kind of close to God and kind of in between this and that and got a foot in each camp. And we've always entered into dangerous territory in our private minds if that's what we do. So Genesis 34 teaches us, I believe, the dangers of an unexamined life. And so I want to flip that script. I want to say it positively because as difficult as Genesis 34 is, I don't want you to write down all these really difficult, awful things. And so what I want to do is say, okay, that's what it says. This is what it describes. Let's flip the script and let's put it positively. So would you write this down positively? Would you write down the blessing of an examined life? The blessing of an examined life. An open life. You see, the heart of the matter is that we bring our heart to God. Bring your motives to God. Bring your anxieties to God. You see, God is not a formula. God is not a principle. Oftentimes people who even teach the Bible will say, I want to give you 5 principles. By the way, there are principles, and those are good things. But you see, principles aren't going to save you. Only the person of Jesus Christ can save us, a personal relationship with him. God is not a formula. God is not a principle. God is a person, and he encounters us personally through Jesus. And by the way, we're not going to do this perfectly because we're just human. We're just human. And so I'm not saying, do you do this perfectly? Because none of us could ever measure up. My question to us is this: do we do this at all? Do we stop and just examine before God and say, God, search me and know me. Slow down. Disengage. Stop. Listen. Pay attention to what's going on inside of your heart and inside of your mind. Let God examine your motives, because I believe Genesis 34 has been preserved not only because of what it said to the people in that day, but what it has to say to us. Let's let the Word of God do its work in warning us so that we can endure as we follow Jesus. So now that you have your Bibles open, we've gotten warmed up here. Let's start taking a look at it. Chapter 34, I'm going to read verse 1. Follow along if you would. Verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. Jacob, is this where you want to be? Who did this horrible thing to your daughter? Where are they from? Why did you get so close to them? Jacob, what was it that you didn't want to examine in your own heart? Jacob, is it really just about the money to the point where you would encounter chapter 34? Jacob, didn't you promise to God something 20 years ago that you would settle somewhere else if he ever came back here? These are questions that the unexamined life would never ask. So one of the dangers of living an unexamined life is the pain, now listen to this, the pain that our unexamined life brings into the lives of those around us. Would you write this down? I'm going to put it positively. The blessing of an examined life is this: it protects others from getting hurt. It protects others from getting hurt. When we take time and be quiet before the Lord and listen to Him, you know what I never have to do? I never have to wonder, maybe this pain in my life I brought on myself because I never stopped and asked God to examine me. Now, by the way, that doesn't explain every pain and hardship in our life. We don't want to go to that point. But if I know I haven't been living in direct disobedience to God, I never have to worry about that. Look again at verse 1. It says in verse 1, now Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. Look at verse 5. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Jacob's unloved wife, Leah, had unloved children. One of them was named Dinah. In just last chapter, we saw that Jacob ranked all of his kids as he heard Esau was coming with a small army to kill them, and he put the kids he didn't love as much in the front. That's Leah. That's Leah. And that's her unloved mother. That's Dinah, the unloved mother, and there they are. And the unloved Leah and the unloved Dinah, when Dinah's violated, it didn't seem to make much difference to Jacob. He did nothing about it. You see, there is favoritism. There was favoritism settling in Jacob's heart. Would you write this down in your outline? Number 2, stopping and listening to God identifies our favoritism, and this is a big deal in this family. Favoritism is common to mankind. It's a temptation that we're faced with, and we need to bring it to the Lord, because we will reap what we sow, and if you sow favoritism, you will reap jealousy, and hatred. In fact, it really comes as no surprise that one day, Leah's her less loved sons are going to sell Jacob's most loved son as a slave. This all comes back home. Look with me at verse 30. Skip to the end of the chapter, and you're going to see something in verse 30. Look at what Jacob says to his two sons. It says in verse 30, "Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, 'You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious.'" Notice how self-consumed Jacob is with his pain. If it's painful for Jacob first and foremost. That's just kind of how he's wired. Look at what he says. "Look what you've done to me, making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." So Jacob is really good at seeing that there is real danger out there, that something really bad could happen because of what his sons eventually do in this chapter. As you read it, you'll see what they did. So Jacob's really good at identifying danger externally, but here's where he falls short. He never took time. It seems he never took time to examine the dangers of an unexamined heart, of favoritism. He's afraid. And it gives birth to his worst fears in life. Now, by the way, fear is not evil. It's just human. To have fear is human, but unexamined fear leads to all sorts of nasty things. So would you write this down in your outline? Number 3, identifies our fears. The blessing of an examined life is we identify our fears. We come before God, we get quiet, we identify those fears, because here's what fear can do to people. Fear can paralyze you so you don't act. Fear can make you come across very passive, which is why he did nothing when he heard about it. He was afraid that if he acted, he could lose his money, his security, all he had worked for, all of his safety. He loved that the most, and he didn't want anything to interfere with his agenda of where he was going to settle, because something had settled in his heart that he never brought before God. Skip back up to verse 5. Chapter 34, verse 5. "When Jacob heard that his daughter had been defiled, his sons were in the field with the livestock." What were they doing? What were the sons doing? They were making money for dad. And so Jacob did nothing about it, it says. So it not only helps us when we stop before God, we say, "God, I want to make sure I'm in the right spot, and I want to listen to you," because that can provide a protective factor in our life, that we've listened to the Lord. We settled where we're supposed to set. We protect those around us. There's a protection that can come from that. If we let God examine our hearts, you've already written this down, we can identify issues of favoritism. If God examines our hearts, we can start identifying the fears we have that are very real, but shouldn't control us. There's another blessing of an examined life, and it's going to be seen in the reaction of his sons. So look with me at verse 7. Verse 7 says, "Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the field, and as soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious." Shocked and furious, because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not have been done. I'd like you to take a look at this picture, this image on the screen. Having read verses 7 and 8, I want to look at that picture and say, Jacob, if you would have just stopped, and bring everything that's settling in your heart to God. If you would let God sort it out, if you would have spent time alone with the Lord and just listening to what he's saying, because he who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Let's listen to what God is saying in the word that he's preserved for us. Let's step back, let's stop, let's disengage. Let's remember the Lord is our shepherd, and when God is my shepherd, I lack nothing. God, you've got my back. I will not fear, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, because you're my shepherd. God, I'm bringing my favoritism to you. I know I love this more than this, and I shouldn't, and I'm bringing that to you, God. I'm bringing my fears to you. I'm bringing my security to you. I'm bringing all that to you. God, you know I'm only human. You know I have limitations. You know what? The Lord loves those prayers. He wants us to stop. And if we don't stop and examine what's going to go on, some really awful things get unleashed out of anger. Sons who are shocked and furious, they're angry because there was no justice. And once that anger starts, things burn out of control. So our unexamined fears stokes the anger of people around us. And anger is not evil, it's human. But unchecked, unexamined anger can lead to all sorts of bad things. So would you write this down in your outline about the son's behavior? Would you write this down? It identifies our anger. In fact, if you look at verses 24 to 29, I won't read them, but you can look at your Bible. You can see the two of Jacob's sons are really angry. And by the way, it happens to be the two full brothers of Dinah who is violated. If Dad's not going to stick up for her, at least we have to. We saw what Dad did to us. He put us at the front of the line to face danger. So we better make this right because we know all he's about is making money. And they're justifiably angry. But here's the thing, is their anger goes way over the top. It just gets out of control so quickly. And you see in verses 24 to 29, they take all the possessions of the people who did this to their sister and their whole town, and they enslave the women and children. You see, Genesis 34 shows us what an unexamined life can unleash. I wrote this down before the events of this past week happened. So what I'm about to say didn't come from the headlines. I wrote down, a generation of fearful appeasers creates a generation of angry avengers. It's predictable, isn't it? A generation of fearful appeasers, a generation that doesn't bring themselves before the Lord and fear the Lord and say, God, would you examine our hearts? We are creating something in the next generation that we should not be surprised at. And when it's unleashed, we should not be surprised at how bad it can go and how out of control it can get. Look with me at verse 13, chapter 34. It says, because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied, notice this, deceitfully, as they spoke to Shechem and their father. In other words, they knew how to keep their anger under control until they could get a deal negotiated so they could get revenge. So look what they're doing in verse 13. Verse 14, they said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We'll enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all of your males. They're deceitful. They're going to get revenge. And they're going to use religion to get it. They're going to take something that God said was a sacred, symbolic sign called circumcision. And they're going to use that as a tool. And what's their dad going to say to them? Oh, you shouldn't do that, sons. You shouldn't use religion to get your way. You shouldn't use God's name to take advantage of people like that, even if you're angry and they did something wrong. Because you know what they'd say to their dad, Jacob? They'd say, oh, really, Dad? You think that's what we should? You don't think we should do that? What did you do to our grandpa when he thought he was dying? You deceitfully got on his deathbed, pretended to be your brother, and when he questioned you, Dad, we remember the story. We know what you did. You lied to our grandpa. Because grandpa said, how did you find this food so quickly? And what did Jacob say? Well, the Lord was good to me. He provided. No, he didn't. Mommy made the meal. We remember the story, right? So what can this generation say to that generation? Deceitfully using religion to get revenge. Would you write that down? Let's write that down. It's right there in verses 13 to 17. If we stop and examine our heart, we can then say, you know what, I shouldn't be using God's name to get my way. People do that all the time. They use religion and God's name to get all sorts of things from other people, and it's deceitful. But if you don't stop and let God examine that, you're going to do the same thing. I told you this whole chapter is about money. It really is about money. And we expect that in the world, but we hope that people who follow God have better motives than money. We know that the world looks at people as something that's expendable. You can buy and sell them. They're like property. In this case, women, daughters. Go back to verse 4 and notice what the men said in verse 4. They said in verse 4, Shechem said to his father, get this girl as my wife. Get me this girl. Get this to me. I want this. She's an object. She's been commodified. She's just, that's what she is. In verse 9, if you look at that, the leader of the city of Shechem said, let's cut a deal so we can all get rich off this thing. You got daughters, we got daughters. Let's just enter into a marriage agreement so that we can really all do well. Look with me at verse 9. It says, marry with us, give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourself. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Notice this. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. By the way, nothing wrong with living, nothing wrong with trading, nothing wrong with acquiring property, but have you brought your heart to God? You see, what the world has noticed about Jacob is he's all about the money. You see, when the world knows that God's people are about the money, they know we can be bought. The church can be bought. People who go by the name of Christ, if they're about the money, they can sell out. Have we sold out? What would have happened if Jacob would have stopped long enough to listen to God about what was rolling around in his heart? Because if he did that, maybe he would have gotten to the point where he said, you know, Lord, I'm valuing things too much. You're not against me making money. That's not, the problem isn't the money. It's the problem what settles in our heart. And so would you write this down in your outline, number 6? Identifies our use of people as possessions. One of the blessings of having an examined life is we say, God, is there a way I'm viewing people as something that's to be used, like a possession? Am I valuing things over people? And once the world finds out that the church is willing to live an unexamined life and they'll sell out, here's what the world's going to do. They're going to go to their own people, and that's what happens in this story. They go back to their city and say, hey, look, we just cut a deal with these people. They're really easy to buy. Wow, was that easy to take them over. They will compromise anything for a quick buck. I remember one of the most impactful things I heard Chuck Colson say. When we lived in Fargo, we were in college, we went to hear Chuck Colson speak at the time, and you know who Chuck Colson was, a prison fellowship, but before that he worked for the Nixon administration. He was called the Hatchet Man. He was the guy, one of the things he would do is he would bring in religious leaders into the White House to wine and dine and charm because he knew how easy it was to buy them. He did it. And I remember him saying, I clearly remember him saying in the room I was in the banquet hall, that he said, be very careful as a church that the church is not bought by any political party. Because he saw pastor after pastor come into the White House, and they become so enamored with the power of the Oval Office that they're just like sheep. That was an important word from Chuck Colson. And so the world's going to know when we can be bought. Now look with me at verse 30 again. We've already looked at it once, but because no one stopped to examine their heart in this passage, I want you to see what unchecked human nature becomes, what's common to man. Verse 30, it says, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Look at this. The people living in the land were few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. Don't you guys understand? I'm blaming you for your anger. It's your fault that you let your anger get out of control, when the real issue, when you're pointing at someone else, you should have brought your heart to God, Jacob, because you have so much fear. You love security. You love money. You love possessions. There's things you're passive about because you haven't let God examine your heart. What kind of people are we becoming, and who are we blaming for what's happened? He blames his sons for their anger problem, and they had an anger problem, but Jacob's problem was deeper. Oh, he should take care of something big in his eye before he tries to take the speck out of his son's eyes. But look what his sons say. Look at verse 31. Look what the sons say back to the father. The sons who have unchecked anger issues. Look what they say. But they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? That's a good question. That younger generation says to the older generation, where's the justice? That's a good question. That's a good question. So I'll say again what I mentioned earlier, a generation of fearful appeasers creates a generation of angry avengers. But I want you to write this down. It's on the screen. Would you write down this statement? Imagine how different today would look if we had examined our hearts before God yesterday. I want you to think about that. In fact, I want to pray with you about that right now. I want all of us to bring our hearts before God. And I want to ask God to examine each of us. Because there's so many blessings to be found with an examined life before God. And so let's pray. God, we want you to be our vision today. The heart of the matter, Lord, is our hearts. We need wisdom to see what you see inside of our own hearts, and so we stop and say, God, let your word speak to us. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. You're our treasure. Jesus, help us to see your face so that when we see the face of our neighbor, we're filled with compassion, that we're not distracted by the things that have settled in our hearts. So Jesus, we worship you as the one who searches us and knows us. Make us like you. For we pray this in your name. Amen.